AA Beyond Belief is a podcast by, for, and about people who have found a secular path to sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, hello. Today we're going to meet Brendan. He is from the Rainham Group in, I think it's London, England. Must be right there or thereabouts.
That's correct, yeah.
I met him at the online secular AA conference that we had on December 5th of this year. And we were doing a live stream just the other day, Angela and I, and we had nothing to talk about. So I asked him to appear, and we had our time confused. So instead, he is here with me today, and I'm really happy to have him. Welcome to AA Beyond Belief, Brendan. It's nice to have you here.
John, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for asking me.
So, how did you like that the God Word presentation that y'all gave at the conference? Do you think that went pretty well?
Yeah, we were hoping it would. I seen it as just kind of a little start to a lot of conversations that secular AA, all of us need to be having together. So I found it useful from that point of view, and in the sense that it's not something that was always uppermost in my own mind. So it kind of formulated some ideas in my own head, which, as I said, kicking off at the conference was a good idea. So let's hope we can move forward with some of those things that we brought up.
Yeah, I was working behind the scenes, so I wasn't really able to pay attention to the panel. Today I got the audio ready to post on the AA website, the secular AA website. So that's up there now. And I look forward to listening to it. But as I was editing the audio, it was really interesting when I was going through the audience participation part, some of the comments that they made. So for those that are listening to this podcast, you can go to the secular AA website. By the time you listen to this, it should be at seculara.org. But you can also find it at aasecular.org. And you can listen to that. So, Brendan, what I'd like to do, if you're game, I would like to learn about you through your story and let a conversation flow from there. How's that sound?
Great. Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, no problem. I'll promise not to make anything up.
And I might heckle you as you go along.
Heckling's fine. That's good. Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah. Okay. Well. I'll just kick off. Obviously, I live in the UK in London. I've been here for just over 34 years, but as you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not originally from London or the UK. I was born in a lovely little village in the northwest of Ireland. I am the baby, the youngest of a very large family. My parents had 12, and I'm the youngest. So yeah, I guess that's what you would have said was a good Catholic family, but I choose to say that my parents were Catholic. But so the odd thing is people always assume that, it was bedlam in my home. But a lot of my family had left by the time I actually came along. It wasn't unusual for people back in Ireland that time at the ages of 16, 17, as some of my siblings did left Ireland and came to places like London to work. So it wasn't a crazy household. It was a gentle. My best recollection, because sometimes what I remember today might not be exactly the same way as I might remember yesterday. But my best recollection is that in most part it was a reasonably normal upbringing with a couple of little bumps along the way. But it's the strange thing is being from Ireland and the northwest, as you probably know, and we all hear that the Irish love to drink and all the rest of it. That might be the case, but I don't particularly like the stereotype of that. But my family, it was a taboo thing. It was a very taboo thing. We didn't have drinks on the table, particularly around this time of the year, Christmas coming up and that. We didn't do that. There was no bottles of wine. So it wasn't spoken about or anything, but I knew growing up as a child from what I seen of what alcohol did to people. I was quite adamant that I didn't want to drink. I was clear I would never drink. I never smoked and I never drank growing up, and I still haven't started smoking, but obviously being here with you this evening, it's obviously I picked up a drink, and my dad, he was a drinker. And he would have been, say, 52 years of age when I was born. And he had stopped for many years. I hadn't known this as a child growing up. But then when I was maybe around 10 years of age, he started to drink again. So he was just coming up on 60, 61. And he passed away when I was only 14. But I didn't like what drink did to him. I didn't like what alcohol did to him. He wasn't a nasty person. In fact, he was quite mellow. But I knew that from a physical, even physical point of view, it wasn't good. And like I said, again, it was a taboo subject. It wasn't talked about. But I know my mum was, at the time, I was too young to articulate it. And it wasn't spoken about. But I knew that she didn't like to see him going out drinking because he did drink to excess. You know, he's dead many years now, so I can't tell his story. But I just did not like alcohol and what it did to people. And again, with other members of my family as well. So it was a shock, really. It was a shock. That's one of the words I use. That I actually picked up a drink. It was on a school trip, my first trip away from Ireland to Amsterdam with all my peers, and we started drinking. And that was it. I was away. And that was it. Then once I started, and I don't know if I ever explained this very well, but to me it was as if I was keeping my drinking secret, which is impossible, because when I drank to excess, and when you do that, you get drunk and things happen. But it was almost like I wanted it a secret, and I wanted everyone to play the secret with me.
I understand.
My friend,
I was that way as well. I understand completely.
yeah, and so yeah. I mean, there was things happen, don't they? Things happen. Not a lot of good things, and certainly when you get to AA first, or my recollection is I remembered all the bad parts. You know, there certainly wasn't any good parts to keep me drinking anyway. But and I did geographicals at a young age. In fact, I had a reasonably good job in Ireland. And at the age of 22, I said I would take a career break. That time in the late 80s, it was the norm for people in civil service jobs or government jobs, might call them in the States, and for people to take career breaks and go back. But really, nobody did take the career breaks to go back to work. Everyone knew that you were going to go on to something else. So I did that. But really what it was I was doing a geographical and running away. And I left Ireland in 87 to go on a world tour, believe it or not. I was going to travel the world. And that was 1987. This is 2020 and I'm still in London. So the tour continues. But I had to get away. It was a relief to get away, but nothing stopped. Nothing stopped in terms of the drinking. I just went from one chaotic situation to another. And and I mean, most of the chaos as well. I don't know if I hear it. Obviously, you hear it in the rooms, and we talk about things again that happened, incidences, and the problems we have around our own behaviour and conduct with others, the remorse, and all of those things which affect all of us. But for me, the chaos was just as great in my own mind as well. You know, I don't want to use the word pain because it sounds a little bit too dramatic, but waking up day on day, realizing that you're just not happy with being alive, and a lot of guilt around that as well, feeling guilty, because of course you've got people in your life who care for you, coming from a big family, having friends, all of that stuff. So it made me feel guilty that I was feeling these things, and I wasn't even able again to recognize that guilt for what it was. I had to get sober and get a little bit better to realize that that's a lot of the struggle that I have as well. Not really wanting to be taking part in the world for whatever reasons, and then knowing that there were people who didn't mind the fact that I was alive and kicking in the world. So it's a hard place to be, for any human being, and for an alcoholic like myself who had no coping skills. I hadn't learned any coping skills for life because I had started drinking early. It makes it a little bit more difficult, I think.
It does. Yeah, I started early too. It's interesting that you grew up with an alcoholic father and did not like drinking. And this is a story that's somewhat common. I guess there are some that will not touch it, as they become adults, but then others the gene just kicks in,
Yeah, I think I like I read it once in a book. I think it was a book that suggested that Keane Henry was, and a couple of the other Keanes were in this country were alcoholic, but it was the guy that wrote the book. I can't remember. It's many years ago. He said that we're born with this inherited vulnerability to alcoholism, and I think that's definitely predisposed to it. And even in my own family as well, there are siblings that didn't take a drink, but by their own, now years on, they'd say that if they had, they feel that maybe the touch paper would have been lit as well, from their own behaviours. But crazy stuff, really.
So was there any one event, or was it a series of things that happened that resulted in you finally reaching out for help?
I guess I was quite fortunate. I still work for the same company that I began working for in London in 1987. And at the time I was in a role that was what they call safety critical. So it was getting to a point where they were saying that we would have unannounced alcohol and drug testing and things like that. So I guess in the back of my mind, that was there. But additionally, I guess as well, with my drinking, a relationship had come to an end, and I was living on my own. And the drinking, oddly enough, began to taper off. And because I would work around the clock, shift work within the 24-hour period of the day, my drinking tapered off. It wasn't an everyday drinking in the end, but it was heavy binges. And then the fallout from the heavy binges was really bad each time. And I found myself a lot of the time finding that the drinking just wasn't working anymore. It really wasn't working. And I had, my last drink was on the 31st of May, 93. And it was, we call them bank holidays. I think you might call them national holidays in Northern America. But yeah, I went on a binge. And I took some pills and, excuse me, I take some water. Thank you. Good job. I brought some water and tea.
Good.
But yeah, so it was a heavy binge and I took the pills. I really genuinely don't know how many of these pills I had taken, but it was the first time that I had done something like that. And I was really, really an empty vessel at that stage.
Was it a suicide attempt, Brendan?
I think I had little more serious ones when I was 18, 19 years of age. I think I had more serious ones. I certainly hadn't, it wasn't premeditated in any sense of the word. I was just quite surprised to notice that there was a lot of open pills on the floor and half a bottle of vodka. So I think the vodka, if I'm honest, knocked me out. So
yeah, I say that I have a really frightening memory of from my drinking that involves I could possibly not be here. And so whenever I hear somebody talk about a suicide attempt, it's like, wow, just here's what happened. So my mother committed suicide, and that was something that that kind of propelled my drinking. Okay. Not that I didn't already have a problem, but it really kind of boosted things for me. But during that time after her death, I was drinking. I was drunk one night, and this is really a bizarre memory, and I don't know what went on, but I just went to my father's room and I pulled the gun out of the drawer by his bed and I put it in my head and pulled the trigger, and the safety was on and it didn't go off. And I tried again and it didn't go off, and I just put it down and walked away. But the most bizarre thing about that memory is when I was doing that, there was no thought. It was just like I was walking from one room to the next. My life had become so shallow and meaningless and hopeless that I didn't care. And so being in that place, but that didn't stop me from drinking. I think what I was doing with my drinking is I was numbing that pain. It was my medicine, and it just didn't work very well, as you know. But so yeah, when you told that story, it kind of reminded me of that day. And it's just, and I know that feeling. And I think that, I think it's pretty common for a lot of us to have that and to use alcohol as a way to not have to feel that kind of pain.
Yeah, exactly. I think, although in terms of getting to the fellowship, I think that moment, that particular evening, that on 31st of May, 93, as I said, I was so drunk. I don't know how serious an attempt. Fortunately, it wasn't. If I'd been if I had any lucidity within the evening to have taken enough pills, I might not be here. There were previous times when I was 18, 19 years of age where I actually tried to. I'd taken a blade to my wrists, and it's silly. I don't mean to joke about it, but I always joke about disposable razor blades, that it's just as well they don't shave very well,
Right.
because they don't cut wrists very well either. But I know I do know when I look back, I'm thinking, gosh, I was a 19-year-old kid and I was doing this to myself. I was away from home. I was working in the city. And wow, what a call, what a cry for help that is for anyone, and I'm able today to look back, and say, wow, that kid needs looking after. He did, nobody deserves that.
Yeah, that's a nice perspective to have, isn't it? To be able to look back on you at that younger age with some compassion.
Exactly, yeah, and I do that. I'll be honest, I do that more now than even I did when I got sober first. I mean, I was excited to get sober because of what I knew. One thing I should say as well, happily, there were people in my family who were sober, thanks to AA, that I knew. And the odd thing was I used it as an excuse that AA wasn't for me because I wasn't as good as one of them.
Oh, really?
And I wasn't as bad as the other one. Now, what a game to play, to put yourself where you don't feel you're even good enough to be an alcoholic.
Not even good enough for AA.
Not even exactly. I was measuring on the spectrum. I was measuring my extremes against others. There I am with a completely unmanageable life, sad, lonely, full of fear, not able to cope with life, and yet I'm comparing myself to people who seem to be getting it together and thinking, well, they deserve it. I'm happy for them. So, but I'm not there, not because I'm not bad enough, but it's because I'm not worthy to be an alcoholic. Which, it just goes to show the power of the illness, really. And it reminded me as well that when I did finally throw the towel in, I went sick after that last drink from work for a few days. And fortunately, they had begun this situation at work. It happens a lot in industry now where they take you in and they ask you why you were off sick, if they can help you. It's part of good business practice, but it's part of, taking care of people's well-being as well. And I said to my boss, well, I wasn't sick, actually. I was drinking too much. I was so shocked. I had intervened in my own drinking without any knowledge or notion that that's what I couldn't believe what I had said. I shocked myself, and I began to shake a little more. He was a lovely guy, this boss. He was a beautiful old guy that was ready to retire, and all this thing was new to him. So I'm shaking from my last drink, and he's shaking because he's a little bit nervous. He hasn't come across this before, but it was. I'll always remember it. I will always remember it. And from there, I got counselling through work, and that was great. The counsellor said to me in my second session, "Yeah, you're an alcoholic. You need to go to AA." And that was it. Yeah, and that's exactly what I did, because it was such a relief. The way I've been describing it more recently even than at the time, like when I get into a jet to go away somewhere on a holiday, which we don't do much of at the moment, I'm going to assume that the captain and his first officer are completely trained. And that's why, luckily, I was teachable and I was childlike when I got sober, because to be told by somebody who was a counsellor, a trained counsellor, a psychotherapist, that you're an alcoholic, that was good enough for me. Once this guy said to me, "You're an alcoholic," I was so happy. I know we say that we have to accept it and acknowledge it ourselves. I knew that I had a problem with alcohol. The extent of it, I was in denial about, because I didn't understand it. But to have this guy tell me, "You're an alcoholic," it was a relief.
It would have helped me too, actually, to have like a professional person say that, because I was just turning 26 when I went to my first AA meeting, and I first considered going to AA when I was 19. So it got me pretty young in life. And the one thing that kept me from getting help is I always assumed I was too young to be an alcoholic. And up to the point of my first AA meeting, I still believed that. And what saved me was I saw that third tradition on the wall, that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. My life was so messed up, I knew I had to stop drinking. Not that I really wanted to, but I knew I had to. So I said, I belong here. And I put aside the whole question about the label, and that saved my life. If I would have just assumed, I'm too young, I never would have stuck with it.
The thing, yeah. I think possibly because I came from such a big family, that even I was 27, but I felt like I was 127.
Me too. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. I never felt young when I was in my 20s.
I never did. I mean, I drank with guys who had sons and daughters my age. And it's a crazy thing because sometimes on a Saturday night, especially in the pubs here in London, the pub that I go to, I would speak to them and talk to them like as if I was their age, and they'd say that their son or their daughter or whoever was going out to a nightclub, and I'd say, "Oh, it's good. That's nice for those. That's nice for those guys that they're doing that." And I was 23, 24 talking like that. So age never came into it. To be honest, I could have come in at 19 or 20. I think. But yeah, it was a relief to get to the rooms, and I loved AA.
I was wondering about that. What your first impressions were?
I loved it. It was everything that the counsellor said to me. My first meeting was on the 22nd of July, 93, St. Vitus near St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and it was lovely. I met some lovely people, and again, how often we say, "Oh, you don't have to be down and out." You don't have to get to a certain level, a certain bottom to be an alcoholic. And that I knew. But what in fairness now, looking back, this was a city meeting because where I lived was close to the city at the time. But there were people there who were running businesses, CEOs of companies. In fact, my first sponsor worked for a very big American firm. And it's not that I planned it that way, but it really was fantastic to hear these people who looked so smart, and they spoke so well, and they were talking about being full of fear and about things that happened in their drinking careers. And I was thinking, yeah, that was me. That's the way I was feeling. And the stories helped because it was fantastic to hear these people and see where they'd got. So they helped as well. Them little stories.
Exactly. That's what gives you the hope is that, from that first meeting is when I got that hope, because I had the same experience. I was downtown Kansas City, Missouri. This is the 1980s. So people used to dress up for work. And so people were looking quite prosperous and well. And they were telling me these stories where they were right where I was. They had similar experiences, if not the same experiences, and the same feelings and the same type of drinking. And it was just hearing those stories and seeing them now and them telling those stories as if it was something that happened in the past, and even little tinges of humor as they went around the room. It gave me hope immediately. I thought, good.
Yeah, and I think what helped it was great. I think what helped was there was a 6-week period between my first counselling session and my first meeting. So I guess I was physically a little bit more dried out. I began to eat better. The counselling in itself was a great start to a new beginning for me. So I was ready for my first meeting, and it was great. And I can remember the chap doing the chair. The one thing I picked from it was he was taking driving lessons, and I had never had I didn't have a car. I never learned to drive. So I was thinking, this guy's learning to drive. I'm going to do that. So there was them little nuggets of hope, if you like, about the little things, which is something I try to do a lot now, with newcomers and that. I said to them, okay, take it nice and easy and start to do some enjoyable things. Set up a reward system for yourself. Just little things. It's not, don't be putting yourself into a corner about things that are suggested to you. Give yourself some time and some space. So, a lot of my family they're very interested in drama and things like that. So I never went to theatres in London or any of those things. I started to do those things straight away. I started taking my driving lessons, as I said, and it almost took a back seat that I had this sponsor, but I approached the steps initially in a very mechanical way. The sponsor said, do this, and I did it, and so I was happy. I really was a 28-year-old kid, if you like, properly and enjoying it. So yeah, doing the steps and what he suggested was not a problem.
Yeah, I kind of did that. It wasn't a problem for me. And what was your belief system going into this? And did any of the God stuff bother you at all at that time?
I can remember saying something to the counselor. What exactly it was, I don't know. And what he said back to me, I really don't know either. I can't remember. But it wasn't, obviously what he said was enough to make me feel comfortable going to the rooms. I did think AA was religious.
You did.
I know that.
You had that. You
I did
that.
think it from being a kid. I was quite certain it was. Then I had admitted to work that I had a problem. The counsellor, and as I said, once the counsellor said go to AA, I didn't have an issue. It was getting well. That's really what I was focused on. But almost just over 3 months, I'm going to guess around 3 months into it, I spoke to somebody, and I said to them, I'm really enjoying AA, but I don't believe in God. So, I haven't for a long, long time. In fact, I don't think I ever did. I believed in God the same as I believed in Santa Claus. Nothing grew from there. So this person, again, somebody that they were a psychotherapist, and I wasn't going for psychotherapy. They were in my family, believe it or not. So I was lucky. I got a freebie, and they said to me, "Look, just take the collective wisdom of AA as your higher power." And I thought that sounded lovely, the collective wisdom, and that was it. That was it. I was really up and running then. Because again, here was somebody who I looked up to, somebody I respected, somebody who was in recovery themselves as well. And they said, just use the collective wisdom. And that was it. That was okay. That was enough for me then. So everything that it suggested in the big book at that time to say, power of your own conception, that was good enough for me. And I took it from there. And I think it's remarkable because when you look at the big book, or when you read the big book now, I think to myself, wow, I really just wanted to be sober.
Yeah.
Because, I really never want to be controversial. I only ever want to get people to come to AA and to get well and take care of themselves. But I would not hand the big book to a newcomer now.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't. And you know what's funny too, or interesting rather, is when I started coming in 1988, that book was already 50 years old. And the first time I got it, I was a little disappointed because it was so damn old, right? It was 50 years old. It's 80 years old now. And it's almost ridiculous to give that to somebody who's in their 20s and 30s. It's like, it would be like giving me a book at that time that was like almost 100 years old. Can you imagine?
Yeah. And I was reading something just the other day as well, where it was written, I think, by Thomas, and it was in 2016. They wrote on AA Agnostica, and they talked about if Bill W. was around now, he would be. And I hadn't thought of this myself. He would be like, really? You haven't grasped what science is offering and right across the board. And put it into a big book. That it's very, very sad. And I think in Europe, maybe certainly the United Kingdom and Ireland, when I read the big book for the first time in '93, and being that it was written in America, I thought that kind of English, although it did still seem quite old, but it thought, well, that's American.
That's how Americans talk.
That's maybe that's, and yet we're reading books. We're reading the books that you guys produce and everyone else. But it was kind of, so we were given license thinking that's it. But I think moreover though, I was just happy to be sober. And I was like a kiddie in a candy store.
Me too. I was able to disregard any of my doubts and any of my misgivings about any of the literature and stuff. And I was able to kind of interpret it my own way and everything. But what was really happening to me was the people around me and the friends that I were making was what was really changing my life and transforming me, I think. Not to dismiss the steps, because I thought the steps were helpful too. But it was that connection that I had with those people in the rooms that kept me coming back.
Absolutely, and that's why I use that analogy, like baby. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But the baby to me is one-on-one with another alcoholic. Any two or three, as it said itself in the big book, 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together can solve themselves in a meeting or a group. and that's so important, and yes, of course, the book is so vital. It's really important that the book can be looked back in time as the, if you like, the epoch of the growth of AA. But that's where it needs to be. It needs to be set in its time.
I agree. And I'm not one of those who say that we should change it. I think it'd be great to write something new, but leave that as it was. And there's good stuff in it. And, I was actually on our live stream yesterday, Angela and I were talking about the fourth step, and the way it's laid out in the big book for me was really helpful. And I thought that was pretty brilliant. And I was wondering who came up with that little thing that, and one of the people in the room, Bob Kay, who's an historian, says he just thinks that Bill made it up. He just came up with it himself. But it's really kind of a brilliant way of dissecting those resentments and to understand what was causing me to react the way I was.
Yeah. I don't know either. I often meant to investigate. I often wondered if Richard Peabody had come up with something like that, because it might have been something. I think maybe because he, of course, was at the same, because he wrote this book in 1930 when he was still in Boston. So that kind of formulaic approach.
That's right. He's got a lot of stuff from Peabody, didn't he, from that book? I've never read that. Did you ever read that book?
I actually only very recently, and actually it's lovely. The language in the first 10, 15 pages lends itself to, and to think that it was written in 1930.
I got to read
then
that.
You really see the how strong the religiosity is in AA's big book, because Peabody's book could have been written, certainly them first 10, 15 pages in the 1970s, 80s, now even. It's the language really lends itself to seeing alcoholism for what it is.
Yeah, I forgot that Bill W. read that book and was influenced by it heavily, because of course he doesn't really acknowledge that in the big book or anything.
No, he was never going to acknowledge it. He's my favorite rogue, Bill W. The more I learn about Bill, the more I like him, because I'm thinking, how did this perfectly imperfect human being get to do the great things that he did? And he's quite rightly given as much adulation for getting AA to where, getting it started, given his own human weaknesses, So I think that's fantastic as well, But maybe I might be wrong about Peabody, but I just thought recently maybe that's really.
Yep. I think that you might very well be right. I'm definitely gonna read that. I have totally forgot about that book, but yeah, and it was actually John Stewart, another person from England, who talked about that book. Actually, informed me about that book for the first time like 5 years ago, and here I am. I still haven't read it.
Yeah, I think Ernie Kurtz mentioned it in his book about why AA actually. Got off to such a good start, and where Peabody's book kind of took a back seat. And it's set in the context of the time and the historical, what was happening in the United States at the time as well. It's more easily understood from that perspective.
It's an interesting history for those who like history. I do. I think it's an interesting history.
It definitely is. Yeah, it really, really is. Because certain things that I took as definite, set in stone about AA and how certain things happen, then you find out the real reason. And you think, wow, that's, some of it is very much set in coincidence, and some of it is completely taken from other areas of health and well-being suggestions, so it's very good.
So how did you get involved with going to secular AA meetings?
Well, quite honestly, it was only COVID. It was COVID, and yeah, believe it or not, it's recent in that sense. It certainly is. Certainly, my thinking around it wasn't big, but I had for a couple of years, I had sort of danced with the notion of getting a secular meeting going in the area, because there was absolutely none. So that was one of the first things that I did around. We had our first secular meeting, myself and another chap, Roger, another member here. We got a meeting going on, and our first meeting was on the 9th of May this year. And I had gone on Zoom to 2 or 3 secular meetings in London. And then, of course, I had been to other secular meetings around the world, thanks to Zoom. But my approach to everything was very much free thinking. even if I hadn't been using the language, the free thinking and all that. It very much was. In the end, certainly that what was suggested to me within a few months, the collective wisdom of the rooms. I will admit, I always wanted to build on that. What I was going to build on, I don't know. So, for example, things like prayer and meditation. I remember my second sponsor saying to me, prayer can be anything you want it to be. Think about it more as action. You helping somebody across the road. So I borrowed that. That made sense. Okay, I'll borrow that. And meditation, because, meditation made sense. Lots and lots of people were doing meditation, and it didn't have the same affiliation with, say, religion as it may have had, or even when I was younger. So prayer and meditation was never much of an issue. But I used to think, well, prayer is about how I handle myself around other people in an action way, which was that's not what prayer is really, but that's what I borrowed. And then meditation is what it says on the tin, to a great extent. So I didn't have much. But I became more interested in why anybody would believe in the divine or the supernatural. So I started to have a look at that before I declared myself an atheist, which is what I am. So I spent a lot of time reading, and I became really sort of, gosh, how can anybody believe this stuff? I mean, when I was a child, they used to tell me, Father Christmas is coming. And then you get told at 6 or 7 that Father Christmas he's not real. And you think, well, I knew that really. I knew that, But, that's another thing without going off on a tangent here. People talk about things that are innate in human beings. I think that children are innate, and that they have that innate notion that there is no God. I think we get it fed into us.
I totally agree. I
think it's fed in.
I agree.
I became a great fan of Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, all of them, and I read everything. And I remember about 12 years ago, because people didn't say they were atheists in meetings around here if there were. And I remember saying it. But I said it in a very gentle fashion. It was a newcomers meeting in London, where I live. And I'd never remembered ever being cross-shared before in a room. And this chap who was around a couple of years came in. And I think he wanted to fire a missile at me. And he said, well, if you pick up the big book, he says, the word God is mentioned in there 200 and whatever number of times, he said. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay. And there was a lot of nodding and in the room. And I thought to myself, this is true. I just by coincidence, within the second thought, well, I've just finished reading The God Delusion. And the word God's in that quite a number of times. So where do we go?
Right.
I didn't say anything. So in a sense, there was a little bit of anger and frustration on my part. But I knew I was right to out myself, if you like, and be we say to thine own self be true.
I've had experiences like that here in Kansas City, and Kansas City, of course, isn't as big as London, but it's a metropolitan area, and so it's a bit more liberal than the rest of the state of Missouri, and so people are a little bit more tolerant. But when you come into AA, the people that I'd see in these rooms, I don't think that they were particularly religious, but they were religious about AA. And it was like what that gentleman said to you. It was in the big book. And that's what was important. It wasn't that it was in the Bible. It was in the big book, and you got to do things the way it says here. And I think that's what I got. I mean, there were people that went to church and so forth that were in the meetings that I went to, but I don't think that they made religion such an important thing in their life that they thought it was important to press upon others to share their beliefs. But when it came to AA, they did.
I think, yeah, and that's something, it's a good point. That's something I've thought about a lot. I think once you get to AA and you're an alcoholic and you accept it, and then you are told you've got your acceptance, and to keep what you accept, you've got to have a power greater than yourself. And people, whether they really do or whether they fake it, they think, I must hold on to this now, because if I let go of this, I might drink again. So there's a sense that maybe these people aren't religious at all. Maybe culturally they just go to church, and then they come to AA and they've got a real reason for coming to AA. They don't want to wake up and get ill again in the morning and be sick and be rude to their friends and family. So they want to hang on to that. So I applaud that. But what's terrible, I think, is that they now have this, and there's a kind of a suggestion from people who have a free thinking approach that you don't need this divine, this supernatural thing, and they feel threatened. It's almost as if you could force them into a kind of a cognitive dissonance around what they believe, which they never believed in the first instance.
Right. So interesting, because the United Kingdom, I understand, is a pretty secular country. And like a lot of the churches have been like turned into condominiums and so forth. Is that right? so it's not like it's a country full of religious people. Yet I bet when you go into AA meeting, it kind of gets that way.
And you've just said it, and that's what it is. You see, you get people whose parents have never been churchgoers, and they come to AA, and they've maybe been to rehab. They've got some semblance of normality back in their lives. Maybe their family life has got a little bit better. So they've come to our fellowship, and they get a sense of belonging. But along with that sense of belonging, there's the kind of, well, this is what you have to do. So they think, well, if I have to do this, then I'll have to do it. And going back to what I said earlier, it's kind of like we then come along maybe second and say, well, actually, you don't really need to think that there's a guy in the sky. That's you don't need that. You don't need the magic beans. So we're scaring them into thinking, well, what is it then that keeps us sober? They don't have, for want of a better word, faith in their own in their own ability to stay well through just the meetings and the say a practical 12-step program. And I think more people walk these steps in a practical way than they do. There's this, the pluralistic ignorance that goes on in society is in the rooms as well. Nobody wants to say it. I think these are only my views. It's like the people that say, I have a concept of God that's personal to me.
Whatever.
What is that?
It's a good way. That's actually a nice way of saying. So it's none of your business. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
There you go. I checked that box.
Yeah.
Go on.
Don't take this from me, please. Please don't take my blanket. Please don't take my blanket, because that's what's keeping me well.
Yeah, and it actually it brings you into the fold with the group too, because that's what I noticed when I look back at me at that time is I was really conforming to the norms of the group, because that way I knew I was going to be safe. I don't know. I wasn't really thinking about this in the frontal lobes like it was in my consciousness, but that's what in fact I was doing. And it helped me survive. So you started a meeting on Zoom. When we start actually seeing each other in person again, do you plan on making this a in-person meeting? Or are you going to keep it online, or what do you think?
We have people coming in from different parts of Europe, all around the British Isles, including Ireland, and of course North America as well. So we have, if you like, it's a nice problem to have. So we spoke about it yesterday, myself and Roger and a couple of the other members that attend, and we're thinking at the moment, very loosely, that maybe we'll continue on Zoom and have a physical meeting at a different time.
Yeah, maybe. And, I think this is so interesting that this pandemic has really changed Alcoholics Anonymous. They're now, I don't think that we had that many online meetings prior to this. Now they've just all over the place, secular and otherwise. And they're going to stay, they're going to continue. They're not going away. And groups like yours have started up, and they're not really bound by any geographical boundary,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, I think it's it's fantastic. If we were to think about what we might do, say many years ago, before all of this, before the technology, it would have been magical thinking that we would have had these platforms to do this. Having said that, I think as well, though, there is, for the newcomer, I'm watching what's happening. We're not getting as many newcomers as we had maybe around June, July. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on that. I hope the groups are as well. that there is still the need, I think, for the physical meetings as well, right across the spectrum as to what we have to offer.
Yeah, COVID has been bad for COVID has been bad for addiction. I mean, the problem of alcoholism and drug addiction has exploded because of COVID. So people are quietly in their homes drinking. Some of them are making it to meetings. I hope that when this thing ends, that we'll see an influx of people, and maybe that warmth that you and I both felt at our first meetings will just be even amplified as people come out of isolation. Not just isolation from alcoholism, but isolation from COVID. COVID has been isolating,
Yeah, definitely, very much so. And I think as for all of us that are in the rooms and got on to Zoom and what other platforms, although Zoom I know is the dominant one, I think we're fortunate in that sense. And when we do get back to the physical rooms, I think that maybe the newcomers will feel it more. They'll get that fuller sense of one alcoholic being available to the other alcoholic. And that's why we're here. Physically, this is why I'm here, because I can't pick up a drink, irrespective of our backgrounds or what we do or don't do to make a living.
Well, we have a little of a case study in Australia because they pretty much eliminated COVID. I think maybe it's coming back now. I don't know, but they pretty much had it eliminated. And so, but during that time when they were isolating, they started these online meetings, and they had people from around the world come. People enjoyed the meetings, and then as COVID wasn't even an issue there in Australia, they kept those meetings. I don't know what's going on over there right now. If they are, if it's come back to them like it is the rest of the world or not. But they actually had a period of they actually pretty much dealt with it, which amazes me as an American, where it's just, it's crazy here.
Well, I think you guys had a helping hand. I won't get political.
I know.
But you had a helping hand.
We did. It's crazy. We actually, the leadership of our country was actually against So anyway.
Why do you want to be well? Yeah. I think there's so many great friendships built up as well. And certainly for secular AA as well, which is one of the points I made at the ICSA as well, was that I'd like to see us physically have a convention, a conference as well in the British Isles.
I would
have
too.
Our first one.
I would too. Maybe we can do that after, because I think they're going to have a physical conference in DC in 2021. Maybe we can do that in England in 2000, whenever they're going to do it, 2022, 2023. I don't know if they're still stagger them or not. I would love to do that. My wife and I were wanting to go to England actually in 2019, I think, and that fell through. And of course, we couldn't do anything in 2020. So it's on our list of things that we want to do. And
definitely, yes, yeah.
So
I think it would be great.
I think so too. So too. Yeah, it's not that difficult to get over there. Besides, it doesn't matter because there's a lot of people over there already.
Exactly. Yeah.
They said the same thing about Canada. They said that when we had it in Canada, that it wouldn't be a very big conference because Americans don't have passports, which is really true. A lot of Americans don't. And it was a smaller conference, but it didn't matter because there were still plenty of people in Canada, and there were enough Americans that would go up there anyway. So.
Oh gosh, yeah. I don't think there would be a problem getting people to it. Yeah, I think it would be really, really interesting.
Come over.
Yeah, and I think maybe as well for conventions here in the UK and on mainland Europe as well, the English-speaking ones, that it would be nice to see those organisers sort of get a little bit more enthusiastic about having meetings, secular or free thinker meetings as well. Because that's the way forward, But I'd like to think that in 10 or 15 years' time, if I said I'm going to an AA convention, that it would be a convention that was, I didn't have to say, oh, this is a free thinkers convention or it's traditional, that it's a convention and I can choose then to go to whatever meeting I want. If it's a meeting that will have no prayers and lends itself to that, that's the one I'll be going to, Maybe it's again, maybe I'm being a little bit naive.
It's
But,
happening a little bit in North America. Some of the bigger conferences would have panels of agnostics and atheists and so forth. It's becoming more common. It's really becoming much more accepted in AA here, probably everywhere now. But
I think so. I think so as well. I'd like to think so. It's just that, sir, the literature.
I know
the literature
that's
has changed.
a bit of a hang up.
We go back to that as well, and then think, well, what do we do? Yeah. And
so, do you know that that the London people are going to be hosting the next online ICSA?
Yes, I think Cyril had mentioned something about it. That I think Joe C had approached him about doing it. So that's going to be very exciting. Yeah.
You know, is that going to be in June? I can't remember. When is it? Is it going to be sooner than that?
I think it's sooner.
Okay.
I'm going to say sooner.
Maybe about 3 months or so.
Yeah, I think it's going to be sooner. And I think on December 19th they have a little wrap-up session, haven't they? Joe C mentioned about having a chat.
So
about
I'm really excited about that. When we went into this online ICSA that we just had last week, I said to myself, "This is it. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm done with this. I don't want to get involved in stuff." But now I'm actually excited about it. As soon as we finished that conference, I loved the experience because it was meeting people, making new friends. It was just fun. And, so I enjoyed it. So I'm actually looking forward to this next one too.
Well, I think probably, I don't know, it's your body. I think sometimes the strain of it as well just makes you tired, doesn't it? The physical and the mental strain of it, because you want things to be okay. You think, wow, that's over.
That was an all-day deal. That was an all-day deal. I did not eat from the time it started to the time it ended. And I was totally kind of stressed because we had problems and technical issues, and I was trying to manage it. But you know what? It was still fun. I enjoyed it. So
it was fantastic. Yeah, no, it really was. I mean, you guys did a huge piece of work on that. That's fantastic, really. To think that, honestly, I've been to some physical conventions that didn't have as much organizing into it. Seriously, no, that is, you really do need to know what you're doing to get the platforms up and running. That was fantastic.
And we learned a lot from that experience. That the next one will go a lot smoother, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely will. Yeah, and it'll be built on from there on in. Yeah. Well,
I've enjoyed this conversation, Brendan. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. It's been just wonderful. This podcast has transformed my whole recovery. This has become my home group. This is what I do. These podcasts, talking to you, is my meeting for the day. So thank you for keeping me sober for another day. I appreciate it.
It's been fantastic, a real privilege, having listened to all the podcasts for so many months, and before we got our meeting going here in London, I was listening to your podcast. So to see you in person, and I've seen you at EXA a couple of weeks ago, was a real good. It was one of the highlights for me. It really was. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks for everything you do. You're fantastic.
You are too. So that's it. That's another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it through this episode, thank you double. So if you would like to help support our website and podcast, there's a couple ways you can do that. 3 ways actually now. But you can become a patron at patreon.com/AA Beyond Belief. We're starting to actually give things to our patrons, like extras, perks. So you can consider doing that, or just donate by going to our website, aabeyondbelief.org, or PayPal at paypal.me/AA Beyond Belief. We would appreciate it. And it's not necessary though. Thank you very much.